Yeah. Okay. Everybody standing comfortably? Yes. Okay, so when we say it's going to be an evolving conversation, we're also going to be making this up as we go, just so we're clear.
Interactive workshop.
Exactly, an interactive workshop. Just so everybody knows. So, Jeff, would you like to begin?
Yeah, so Jay and I just met a couple of months ago and really bonded over topics of interest, some of those being like biomimicry, how do we learn from nature, how do we apply those principles not just in physical design, but perhaps also in economic design or business model design. If we're looking for regeneration, we don't need to look further than under our feet. Nature has been evolving regenerative systems for billions of years. And we have all of these patterns that we can learn from if we just slow down a bit, be a little more humble, and learn from the systems that have naturally evolved to be more redistributive, symbiotic, and regenerative for not just who's there, but who is to come. And particularly, I mean, the forest is a great place for all of these patterns. Underground, you have the mycorrhizal mycelial networks that connect up to 90% of plants worldwide, constantly redistributing resources from one to another, kind of creating this underground socialist network of prosperity. So we are here to discuss how and think about with you guys how we can take some of these principles and apply them to business models for cooperatives, for makerspaces, for open source, open hardware, all of those things that are a little trickier than traditional business models where you're producing a private good and it's easy to sell, easy to exclude people from, but all of the important things are actually much more difficult to kind of put a price on. So this session is to ideate around how we can think differently about how we produce goods, especially in abundance, digital goods, So,
I think you've covered it, but also one of the most important things in natural systems is feedback loops. So we're also going to be doing an experiment whilst we're creating. In front of you are sheets of stone paper. Please only use these pens because that will ensure that we can erase and we can reuse these, so we're also creating a circular and cyclical economy. But if you are inspired, if you hear something, be inspired to draw, to create. As we're talking, think about how this might apply to your own businesses. If you have questions, you can also write on the cards and just try and throw them up at the table at us so we can kind of interact. But at the end, hopefully we can take some of the photos of the best insights and things that are coming out of this and create little zines that we can later print and allow for the distribution and dissemination of knowledge across the network. Don't know if that will work, but this whole thing is an experiment, so we invite you to participate in that also.
And we're aiming for sort of information virality. The great thing about these is they print on one piece of letter or 8.5 by 11, one cut, a couple of folds, and you have a little micro zine. So we'll pass these around just so you can get some ideas. They don't have to be only words, they can be pictures. But if you have any ideas when you're hearing something, when you're, if you're inspired, please feel free to drop some ideas on the paper in front of you. We even have a printer here. We can maybe pull one together at the end of the session with some of the ideas, if we've got that. Maybe we should do a quick introduction of ourselves.
Who the hell are we? Yeah, maybe. It's a good idea. All right, so my name's Jay Cousins. My background is I'm an inventor, so this was the first product I invented, which is a fold flat cup for backpackers and lightweight travelers. That's a smaller version. That took me into the world of international business, where I learned about supply chains, markets, how to reach the customers, also all of the issues that arise from traditional business models. That led me to Berlin, where I started exploring business ecosystems and how we can create spaces that allow for individuals to bring ideas into reality. So I co-founded a space called Open Design City in Berlin and subsequently consulted with startups and maker spaces in Egypt and Sri Lanka. And I've spent the last 10 years wondering, okay, how do we align better with ecosystems? How do we design products and create products in a way which is good for the environment? And also, how do we create new business models that learn from the environment that we can better be in relationship to it? Jeff.
So my name's Jeff. I do research communications at an engineering firm called Block Science. Prior to that, I was in the Web3 or the blockchain space, working on a project called the Commons Stack. The whole idea was to take these new tools like smart contracts and blockchain technologies and embed them in sort of cooperative organizations so that we can forward and empower the commons. Moving beyond sort of profit-centered business models, how do we use new technologies to make better collective decisions as people, include more stakeholders other than just those who provide the capital, and have more just and regenerative systems as we move forward into this age of increasing sort of systemic breakdown. So Jay has done a lot of prolific writing. Some of his work can be found online. I really liked his work because it's very meme friendly. It's memetic. I don't know if anyone noticed, we wrote biomemetic, not biomimetic, kind of a play on words because we both like memes. I think it's a nice simplification of a concept down into an image and a blurb, and then you can really kind of simplify and get these things trending in ways that a long paper just won't do. And that's the people I work with are very deep engineers. They're great, but nobody's going to read a 30-page academic paper on mechanism design. We need to really simplify why these things are useful, how they can be applied, and then play with them in fun and friendly ways. So was there anything on
I was going to talk about the general problem.
Great, good.
So if we're looking at businesses in general and organizations in general, I think it's good to have a clear understanding of the ecosystem that we're existing in. So we're going to take it up a notch in a little while and look at the larger ecosystem that we exist in, the global one. But within that, we have a layer of the global economic ecosystem and what behavior sets it incentivizes, what it causes us to do. Because unless we really understand the incentive structures and the standard business as usual behaviors, then we need to understand that as to how we can challenge them. So business as usual, I think it's fairly clear it's killing the planet. I like to say that we produce deserts by default. So nearly everything that we do, we wake up, we have breakfast, we live in our houses, nearly every system that we exist within presently produces deserts by default. And this is incentivized also by the economic system. It causes us to seek control, to scarcify goods in order that we can profit from them. It causes us to extract and to minimize the wages that we pay one another. And it also causes us to externalize pollutants and toxicity into the environment. All of these behaviors are directly rewarded by the ecosystem that we exist within. So we have to somehow find either a new economy, which I think Jeff has been deeper in, I've dabbled in it, but also how we can create organizations that can exist within that landscape and can survive. And I'll give a clue. Actually, it's not about survival at all, it's about death. Because this is actually at the core. Rather than designing businesses that live and produce these products which are hazardous to the ecosystem, if we work in a different way and we produce businesses that are designed to die, then we can produce products that are designed to last. It doesn't apply to every element. There are also different strategies that we will cover, but ultimately this is the level of thinking that we need to be at. We need to think and understand the system as it is, and then look at how we can survive within it as it is, whilst simultaneously looking at how we work together to transform it. So now I'll hand over to Jeff.
Exactly, and there are no organisms in nature that are better at decomposing and making way for the new than mushrooms. So this is their role in nature. After any major crisis, if there's a forest fire, first organisms you'll see on the ground are mushrooms, because there's a whole bunch of unused food. They break it down, they move it through the network to where it's needed, and they trade using market dynamics, believe it or not. If there are mycelial mats with more or less nutrients, they will trade at different rates for sugars from the trees. And this is not an insignificant amount. Up to 25% of energy produced by trees is pushed through the underground network. So it's a significant amount of resources that are being basically actively moved around and traded by these mycelial networks. So the question, I really liked Jay's point, is having products that can last forever and organizations that decompose, as opposed to the other way around. We have this horrible planned obsolescence where companies produce products that are designed to break within a few years so that you have to go back and buy more. And this just creates the same resource extraction problem that we have from capitalism. And how can we move past that? I think there are many different ways. There is no one post-capitalism. There is a pluriverse of options. And I think Mycelium are also great at showing us how adaptive they can be. So this was a book we wrote last year with some folks in the Green Pill Network, basically looking at alternative economic systems. This is written for a Web3 audience, so it's a little bit technical, just looking at some of the tools and technologies that are available. I'll pass this around so anyone can take a look. And also, I mean, the way that we communicate these things, I think there's actually the presentation that's up on the board here is some open source software that I've been building. If anyone is more of a digital bent, I'll pass these around as well. There are some QR codes if you want to participate online rather than on the paper. You're more than welcome to. Just pass those around. So in this book, actually, principles which are up on the screen here, there are many more. But basically, how do mushrooms do what they do? Well, they're networked. They have mesh stability between all these different mycelial mats, like we do with cooperatives or even subsystems or sub-networks of cooperatives. Can you step to the side? Just so
yeah, of course.
They're fractal. They don't have a one-size-fits-all, let's say, like governance system. There's no head mycelium. The network makes decisions collectively somehow. We don't actually know how. We need to explore and understand these organisms much better. And what comes from that is emergence. We don't have to plan for every catastrophe. We just need the network to be diverse and adaptive enough to respond to what comes. Introducing flows. I think our system is so stuck on hoarding. You know, who wins at capitalism is the people who hoard the most. And are the richest, which is such a silly metric because flow is actually what brings health to these systems. If the blood is all in the head, then the body dies. What's the point, you know? And this is kind of where we're getting to with our current systems. Reciprocity, as I said, the mushrooms are always trading and swapping resources between different individuals in the network. And they're pluralistic. They're deciding this all the time, everywhere. There's no hierarchy of authority that questions are being asked and then solutions are being given, because often, as we know, the solutions that come from the top aren't suited to the on-the-ground situation. So these principles are just general principles of how we might think about designing these kinds of organizations and institutional forms that are more adaptive and responsive to the needs of their ecosystem.
So to build on what Jeff was saying, mushrooms are the ultimate survivor. So if you look back at all of the extinction events that have taken place, mushrooms have been the one that have emerged, not just surviving, but adapting and changing the ecosystem around them. So they are symbiogenic organisms. They are literally changing the ecosystem, changing the landscape in order not just to help them better survive, but also to help the organisms that come next survive. One of the critical things, I think, as Jeff highlighted, is the approach to waste. So when mushrooms experience waste, they don't experience it as waste. It's not yet food. So even during the Carboniferous period, sorry, bit of a tongue twister, trees, much beloved now, evolved lignin, and they couldn't be eaten by anything for 60 million years. So trees changed the atmosphere, they over-oxygenated it, the soil couldn't, the leaves became basically a hyper-fertilizer that ran off into the seas, produced algal blooms that produced oil, and again caused more extinction events. It was a cascade of disasters until mushrooms, dry rot fungus or white rot fungus, learned how to eat them and turn them back into soil that could then be digested and used and the nutrients returned. So from an organizational perspective, perhaps one invitation here is to look at where the wastes are within your own environment, because wastes are not yet food, they are free resource, whether it's free resource for learning and discovery and experimentation and prototyping, or directly turning it into fuel or directly turning it into money. And it's not just the material waste, it's wherever land wastes. And if you look around you with the right lens, you will find land wastes wherever you are, even in spaces which are inhabited. Like, we only use our spaces for a certain amount of time, whether it's co-working spaces, labs, machines, infrastructure. If it's not being used, it's being wasted. So by opening these things up to the community, not only do you potentially create more opportunities for the community to generate new businesses and new opportunity, but also further income streams, further possibilities, further businesses that can feed into the ecosystem. Another key behavior looking at networks is that when mushrooms experience this new thing, they basically, all of the mycelial threads, every little strand is both a mouth and a laboratory. So if it encounters something it hasn't yet eaten, it asks this question: what is this like? What have I eaten before that's similar? And it will then try that set of enzymes or modes of digestion, or even creating something in the ecosystem that can digest it for them. And each of these strands simultaneously cycling through different strategies, different approaches, different modes to turn not yet food into food, to turn waste into opportunity. And if we were to look at that across the networks that we have here, even within this space, what are the shared questions? What are the shared challenges? And every one of us looking at an aspect of that shared challenge, taking a different approach. When we discover it, if we share it clearly, simply across the network, suddenly everybody gets an upgrade. Everybody gets a new opportunity. So how do we create those feedback flows? How do we ensure that everybody has access to that shared library, and that we are maximizing the opportunity and creating the right incentives within the network to allow those value flows to take place? Because I'm sure there is within the system, a lot of the solutions already exist. It's just a case of sharing them. Mm-hmm. And finally, the other thing is how mushrooms engage and relate with everything in their environment. So constantly be seeking, what's the minimum viable relationship you can be having with all of the different communities, all of the individuals within your communities, that there are some value flows taking place. It doesn't have to be that you're sitting and talking with everybody, but the more value flows you create, the more interdependencies you create, the more relationships you create, and therefore the more opportunities you're creating within your community to move forward and evolve together.
Yeah. My brain thinks in pictures, so a lot of what Jay just said, I think is captured here. So we have, individuals acting as, say, individual nodes. I mean, it's a little more interrelated than that, but what we need to do is sense in common. What are the challenges here? How do we need to be more sustainable? Maybe someone sees something that other people don't. So how do we lift that up? And then how does that get ranked relative to everything else? Sort of like a Reddit upvote, downvote style system, perhaps. And then how do we decide, once we have a stack ranked list of the things that we need to do as a group, how do we decide which ones we're going to move forward with? Maybe it's just we take the top 5 because those are the ones that have the most votes, or maybe there's a different way that we can decide that. And then how do we distribute those resources back to individuals to carry out that plan? I don't know, there's a term in the Web3 space called doocracy. The doers do, and as long as no one has a blocker or a veto, then you can do it. And if it fails, great, and if it succeeds, great. We learn from failure. This is important. I think we need to be more comfortable with failure and, as Jay said, like decomposing the systems or the institutions that we build, learning from them and trying again, because life iterates, and this is how it succeeds, through evolutionary success. And this is how science and learning and knowledge proceed as well. When we're wrong, we learn, and actually when we're being right is far less useful than being wrong. So I think keeping that in mind when we're going through these systems, but ending up with more. Let's see if this will work. All right. So this is an example of a symbiotic network versus a hierarchical accumulation system. So this is Bill Gates and Elon Musk. All of our dollars are going to them eventually, but if we create these local networks of care, of communication, and not just action, but sourcing what needs to be done. A lot of the time, we don't even have that decision-making power in our democratic systems. They just tell us, oh, it's either yes or no on this, or yes or no on this. The Overton window has already been set. So the question is, how do we create more sensing, adapting, and dynamic systems that can not just more effectively allow for human collaboration, but even deciding what we're going to decide on. So kind of taking a bigger step into this decision-making space. So this article was written some years ago talking about Bitcoin as a decentralized organism, as a mushroom. This really fascinated me and started my thoughts along this process. And this is eventually where MyCoFi ended up coming from. I think she's asking me to step to the side. Yeah. So yeah, I mean the number of ways that we can ideate around this kind of thing, like mushrooms are some of the most interesting, and slime molds, all of these adaptive organisms. They can do mazes, they can solve puzzles, and they can do it more effectively even than groups of humans. So it's funny, the slime mold is actually has a professorship at a couple of universities around the world, I guess affiliated professorship. I don't know how you give a room to a slime mold, but because they're so intelligent, they actually help to design or at least validate the Tokyo rail network. They put food crumbs on all the big cities, and then they actually built the topological map, and they had the slime mold connect the most efficient route between these major centers to validate basically the rail network that they built. So there's all sorts of ways that these can be used and already being used in physical systems. And now we're thinking, how can we bring these into the economic realm as well, or the business model realm? Did you have something to jump in on? I do have one more thing that I want to.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up a little bit on your challenge about how we might organize, because obviously we don't want to establish a hierarchy, but I think ultimately one of the elements is this idea of identity in communication, in how we solve our problems, that we still engage with social media as an identity rather than clustering around conversations and shared conversations of interest. So if we look at these spaces as spaces of opportunity, what are the challenges? Each challenge that we collectively face, to break the challenges down separately, and then anybody that's working on changing that challenge into opportunity, on shifting that waste into food, or taking the problem and making it into something that can help and benefit or address the problem. And then we share what we discover as we discover. We don't get too much into the meta, but this worked, this didn't work. That it's it's chosen by action and success and failure. So this is what we're trying, this failed, this succeeded, and not getting too deep into the philosophy and conversations around it, but filtering by success and failure, what each can learn within the community, and then clustering around the challenges themselves, if that makes sense. I don't know, just planting it. This is an evolving conversation. We're not giving answers, more questions here. Well, there may be some. Hopefully there'll be some answers.
And I think the reason we need to think outside the box on business models is often makerspaces, open source, open hardware, these are offering a fundamentally different thing. I don't know how many people are familiar with the goods matrix. And you can ignore what's in the middle. This is from a project slide that I did, but we have private goods, club goods, common goods, and public goods. So private goods are things that are excludable and scarce. So it's, there's one of them and I can stop you from using it. Like my toothbrush is a private good. It's mine, it's not yours. A club good might be something more like a golf course. So you can put a fence around it, you can charge for access. So it's excludable, you can keep people out, but it's not scarce in that, one person on a golf course, 10, 100, they can all fit. There is some point where maybe 1 million people on the golf course, you couldn't play golf anymore, but I mean, this is another story. Common goods are things like the air, I guess, so it's non-excludable. You can't stop someone from taking a breath. Actually, I guess air would be more like a public good. Common good would be, let me think of an example. I suppose like bandwidth. So if we've got can we keep people off bandwidth? Yes, I suppose we can. Or radio, perhaps. So you can't keep people off it, but at a certain point, your number of users saturates and it doesn't work anymore. So basically, what I'm trying to point out is private goods are very easy with capitalist business models. We know how that works. You can sell shoes, you can sell toothbrushes, you can sell all of these things under our traditional capitalist business models. But when we move into spaces of abundance, digital abundance, or like maker spaces where you can 3D print solutions for people, all of a sudden the pricing model kind of breaks. So this is why we need to think kind of more like nature, because nature produces these public goods all the time, but it doesn't lack for a business model to do so. So we're trying to think outside the box. How do we learn from nature to move beyond economies that produce private goods to economies that produce common and public goods? Because this is where we really unlock that abundance, both digitally and potentially physically, with things like localized production hubs, maker spaces, where solutions can be cosmo-local. What is global is light and shared, like patterns or IP, print templates, and what is local is contextualized and heavy. So your printing happens local, your food production happens local, your energy production happens local. And I think this is a nice way that we can realign sort of our transport issues. We shouldn't be creating stuff half a world away and shipping it to the people who need it. We should be producing the patterns and the templates, and those can just travel over these wires very easily. And then of course the production happens locally, the transport can be much more localized, and we cut down on our costs all the way through.
So yeah, I think to pick up on that, one of the driving questions is then within your own environment, how can you increase access to public goods, and how can we use existing models in order to do so? So ultimately, I think at the moment within the business ecosystem that we exist within, we have to hack existing business models and create new business models that can allow us to generate wealth, and then to be able to invest that wealth in things like land trusts that can increase, at least to begin with, club goods, and then working through that to make those clubs accessible for those that are working to expand the infrastructures for everybody else. So to begin with, perhaps priority is given to those that are working to increase the public good, that we are selective in who we help. And I think this has been a big thing for me in recent years, to move away from community towards clubs, people that I'm in relationship with, people that I'm in trust with. The end goal might be to increase the common good for everybody, but also we need to make sure that we're not drained of energy as we do so. But then in terms of the business models we might adopt, obviously we've been talking about mushrooms, but that's more a network orientation. That's an ecosystem level, and there may be some in the room that are operating at that scale. But for smaller scale businesses, there are other models that you can apply and that we can learn from. So for example, the beaver is a slightly different way of adapting an ecosystem, that you're creating your own market, your own habitat, that's creating further opportunities for you. But also a good example of thinking like a beaver is, when my business dies, how do I also leave the habitat richer for the environment? So the early dot-com companies were actually operating in a kind of beaver level, not deliberately, but they left us with the internet backbone that everybody else now enjoys. So strategically, this is one way of thinking. If I'm creating a business now, what will be its legacy? How will I change the larger habitat? And what will I leave for people that come next? And also, how do I ensure that what I leave is still remaining common? Because obviously what then happened was it got captured and monopolized all over again. But if we do these things consciously, if we think as beaver businesses, what is the legacy you want to leave behind that leaves the whole community stronger after you die? At a simpler level, you might have a mayfly business which is just responding to immediate needs within the market, that's very, very short-lived. And we exist now because of crowdfunding and this kind of ecosystem feedback, we can see very quickly what the market need is, and we might design a product, and this happens on Kickstarter all the time. You design a product, you create the batch for the market, and then you can kill the business afterwards. And if you do it this way, you can actually plan better for, because this is from my insight from my previous businesses, if you're holding stock, if you're having warehouses, if you're having to anticipate production of future sales and everything else, it puts you in a financially vulnerable position. A Mayfly business, you take the opposite approach. We're going to produce something directly in response to market need. We're going to remove the risk by knowing exactly how many products we want to produce, and then the business will die. Now, there are other ways of also approaching this. If you can predict, okay, next year maybe we want to do the same again, so you can have a bear business where you produce goods in the season that they're needed when the opportunity arises, and then go to sleep again. Example of this might be an ice cream truck or a Christmas tree firm. But this can also be applied intelligently across the board, and the incentives are very clear for doing this. If you structure your business in such ways, then you can go on holiday for half a year. And who doesn't want to do that? Like, it costs more energy and it costs more attention, and it's not the way that we are designed as humans to be constantly grinding in this pattern of going to the same job day in, day out. Why would we do that? We have the seasons. They invite activity and rest. So designing things in a bare business methodology, I think, actually makes sense for a lot of companies. And again, you reduce the energy consumption, you reduce the waste, everybody uses their time more intelligently, and it creates further opportunity in the breaks and in the downtime, because then that resource, that human resource that would be used, is able to be dreaming of other things, perhaps reorganizing around different challenges within the environment, rather than constantly in bullshit jobs day in, day out. So that's another invitation. Then you have, on a longer form with that, the cicada business, which might pop up and satisfy a whole generation. So when I talk about businesses that are designed to die to produce products designed to last, a simple example of that would be light bulbs. Everybody needs light bulbs. Light bulbs are designed to break. This was the first ever instance of planned obsolescence. It does not serve the market. It does not serve the environment. It does not serve humanity. And all the patents are expired for both LEDs and light bulbs. There is an opportunity to come in and say, we're going to produce light bulbs for everybody that last for ever, that are repairable, that are unbreakable. And then once you've got them, we're going to kill the business. Now, it might be humanity grows and you need to wake up the business again in future. So you park the tools, you hibernate them somewhere, 25 years, you reactivate that business. And maybe actually you just reactivate that business to keep in the intergenerational knowledge, because this is something that's also important within a society. And an example of how this already exists is in traditional Japanese housing. They will rebuild the houses every 25 years, so they keep the knowledge in the next generation, so they don't allow the knowledge to die. So this is an important social consideration. Just because we can solve the problems forever doesn't mean we necessarily want the knowledge to die. And that knowledge, it cannot be passed in books. It needs to be experienced. It's a handcraft, it's a physical thing. And knowledge is only knowledge when it's in the hands. That's when it's known implicitly. Otherwise, it's an idea. It's the same with watching something on YouTube and thinking you know shit. You don't know shit till you build it. So anyway, that ran over. Then the last one I have here is the goose. So geese migrate. What does an ice cream truck is an example of a combination. But a migratory business, you land in a locality, you satisfy the need of that locality, and then you move on. You take your hardware, you take your knowledge, you take your service, you satisfy it, and you move to the next location. And again, in doing this, you're spreading the knowledge, you're leaving a lasting infrastructure for that community, you're still able to survive, and you're maximizing the good that you're doing in the world by being not located in one physical location, but traveling from place to place to place. So those are the...
What would be an example of
the ice cream truck is a kind of localized version of this. Traditionally in Germany, you would have something like a knife cutter or something like this, but food trucks, ice cream trucks are operating on a local scale. I can't think of anything at the moment that's doing it at a larger scale. I mean, obviously you have nomads, but they're still centralized in their services mostly. But some nomads are doing yoga or tantric workshops when they land in a different location. So, but at a smaller scale. But I think Fab Labs especially have the opportunity to become fab factories, and this is another provocation because they can produce the tooling for then producing products faster rather than 3D printed goods, and go somewhere, satisfy the needs and move on. Yeah.
I like the idea of the Japanese house. But how do you organize for your customers or buyers, or that they can come back to you for knowledge, that they can prepare their own stuff, that they know how to do it?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? Shut down.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, do you want to ask?
How can you arrange for your customers that they can repair their stuff and have the knowledge to do that if you move away or shut down your business? How do you arrange that?
Okay, so that's a great question. I would say on one hand you've got the knowledge as information as so that you can. I know I just said you need to do it by hand, but people are able to translate it from the videos. But within every community, I think there are people that are interested in learning these skills and acquiring them, and we see it in Egypt at least, where these skills are valued within a community, they emerge and they remain, so that you will find somebody that's able to repair it for you and create it. But ultimately, it's a good question, and I don't necessarily have the answer yet. But I think as long as the information is available, then people will be able to get their hands on it and fix it and so on. But then there are also more lasting legacy structures and community structures that would allow for this to happen.
Yeah,
but
you need a paradigm shift in that as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's paradigm shifts across the board, but it's a good provocation and it's something that needs to be considered. I can't come up with the answer right off the bat. Maybe Jeff has something.
I think full life cycle management, full life cycle planning is what's really important here, and this is the sort of operations and maintenance side of things. So there's, a lot of startups focus on the beginning, but they don't focus on, say, supporting their product. So maybe there's some like wind down. I think protocols also offer a very nice way to continue sort of the information propagation. If you can create sort of like the local Uber of device repair, for example, then you can have a knowledgeable, as Jay was saying, a knowledgeable person to fix X, Y, or Z product without having a full business behind them. That's
But also, I think to pick up on this is a design issue. So how we create legible design, and the one of the reasons we don't have legible design. Nice, the system is now active. One of the reasons we don't have legible design is how the incentives are created in the paradigm of control. So people don't want you to be able to repair your devices, they don't want you to be able to look at it and understand how you relate to the system. Everybody understands kind of a screw top, for example. So there are already existing languages that are understood that we can incorporate into the way that we build products. And where things aren't immediately legible, then to be able to open your phone and use AI to read, and it says, okay, you need to replace this part. There are ways in which we can make things legible when we design them that make it easier for people to interact with them and repair them, and then maybe you have people that are specialized in that, naturally emerging, because just because I can look up how to make bread doesn't mean I want to make it.
Yeah, in that question we have in the local hacker space, we have, so regarding that question, we have in the local hacker space live coding documentation sessions plus it's kind of nerdy, but meta tools, tools that describe themselves. So we learn how to read that tools, and it's a workshop. So we are like getting a lot of knowledge, and that knowledge is crystallized into live documentation, hypertext in real time, and we learn how to decompose the tools because they are meta tools. They are tools that describe themselves. So they just to learn how to read the meta tool. That's
Meta tools and
meta tool is a tool that describes itself. So what we do is learn how to use these meta tools. There are like nerdy things in the programming ecosystem, but that's what we do. And we try to use this meta tool metaphor to other stuff. Yeah.
I love how you just provided the infrastructure for what I was talking about and the legibility. So is this a question or more a statement and an observation?
Well, it's a question also. Like, I mean,
Okay.
business models.
Can you pass?
Yep. I mean, business models may work in one community but not in another, and your products and services may work in one community but not another. And if you go to some community and you land of your products and services, but you didn't do any research in front of it or whatsoever, what is your legacy and what is going to happen? What is the waste that you are leaving behind? Because then it will be waste that you're leaving behind.
Yeah.
Like schools built by NGOs now inhabited by monkeys. Very nice for the monkeys. This is like a very extreme example.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
Yeah.
how can you structure this
Yeah.
in your search of a business model that
Yeah.
I think actually one
You
of the
wanna go
interesting,
first?
yeah, sure. Or
Go.
I think I like this discussion of like life cycle, because mushrooms, what they do is they experiment, and they fail a lot, but when they fail, they do other good things. Most of the carbon, like stored in the soil, is stored in dead mycelial networks. Not even live mycelial networks. More is in the dead mycelial networks than in the live mycelial networks. That's the second largest storage of carbon, is the live mycelial networks. First is dead. So the interesting thing about mycelium versus, say, corporations, can you step to the side again?
Yeah.
So mammals split from mycelium. We share a common ancestor. We were mushrooms once upon a time, and we split off, and we decided to have a different evolutionary strategy. We would put food in our body and digest it internally. They put their body in the food and they digest it externally. So this is a really interesting way that they produce all of these positive sum offshoots. So when they break down nutrients, they leave them in the environment. And actually, maybe the monkeys really appreciated this school. So I'm not saying we're building things for monkeys, but I think having a larger picture of what that value is, what waste is, having full life cycle, especially for things like plastics, things that don't break down naturally. But thinking more like a mycelium, where what we produce can be not only left behind and not harm the environment, but maybe even benefit others. This is a great thing about open source, is if someone builds a piece of code that's really helpful, I can take that and use it over here too, and so can you, and so can you, and so can you. So there's this really huge leverage effect when you produce in the open, as opposed to enclosing the value. If I eat a hamburger, you're not full. But if a mushroom does, everything in that area benefits. So there's, I think, a different mentality over how we approach the life cycle of these organizations.
But I think to speak to that, like one of the things is, first you need regional relationships. And so within this community, within Gig, there are multiple spaces which are embedded in and produced by their communities. And I wrote an article a long time ago called On Mushrooms and Makerspaces, which actually observes this. Makerspaces aren't generally, or the successful ones, they're not top down. They're evolved directly from the community and they're produced by the community. So they are actually almost like the mushrooms, the bit of the network that's visible, and that allows for connection. So if you're an NGO, the first thing you should do is consume the local mushroom as a psychedelic that you can relate to and understand what the local needs are. And I think that's the opportunity that these spaces offer, is to actually connect and understand the needs of their community and use that to articulate the opportunities then that can create an invitation for a business to pop up or migrate in order to satisfy that community need. So it needs to come from the community to begin with, and that is an invitation for, and it's a way in which the community mushroom can also bring about the beings and organisms within the ecosystem that allow its needs to be satisfied. So you start from those relationships, and then you create the invitations, and then you look at what is already in existence in the network that can pop up, satisfy that need, profit for themselves, profit for the community, and leave a lasting legacy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
I like these. I like the cosmo-localism again, where the ideas are global, but you can copy, customize, and paste. And the customization is really important because a makerspace in Berlin might be very different from a makerspace in Nairobi. So what are the resources that are available? What are the flows between the various members? These can vary widely. So having the ability to take a protocol or a template and then customize it to your local flows. Maybe the problem here isn't capital. Maybe it's electricity. Maybe there's some other.
Is there some structural methodology or some way of actually approaching it, and then where to start and how to, something more of a case study? Or how did you come from A to the business model you have in your makerspace?
The question was about structural methodologies of these systems.
So, in the case of hackerspaces, there is a wiki that is called Hackerspace Design Patterns. Was started in Berlin, and it was the one that we used in Colombia to create our own hackerspace.
Okay.
And to do this recontextualization. So, because I think that the colloquy will talk especially regarding recontextualizing. How can we take these different models and apply to the
contextualize.
Contextualize. So for me, it's about having these patterns. In the case of hackerspaces, they're already there. The hackerspace design patterns. You need to do a critical reading of that and to put that into the particular context. But that is already happening. It's happening in the local hackerspace and the hackerspace design patterns.
Alright. Can I find this?
Look for hackerspace design patterns.
Okay.
If you are investigating the social guide, that is.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes. Oh, where is it? Is it this one? Or no?
It's that.
This one here. It made its way so quietly we didn't see it.
Do you want to prevent free riders from misusing your free knowledge extracting value? So this is a really good question, actually. The free rider problem is a challenge in the commons. I don't know if anyone's heard of the tragedy of the commons. A bit of a misnomer, because actually he's what is being described by Garrett Hardin, who had a lot of funny views. We don't really idolize him. But he said basically when people try to come together without, let's say money, what happens is you get free ridden. The people who do nothing will take from the people who do, and then you don't have this sort of everyone participating. So this was proposed as sort of the downfall of abundance. And I think actually what it's missing is Eleanor Ostrom did some really great study and analysis of communities of people coming together, indigenous communities for millions of years, how they've been doing this, maybe not millions. But basically sharing common resources. And she came up with 8 patterns that basically all of these communities followed in some way, in their contextually appropriate way. And I think these can actually be built and embedded into these business models as well. So not that free riding on its own is a bad thing. Maybe you have a single mother in your community who is so overwhelmed that she can't contribute. Do we want to deprive her of food and housing because of that? Of course not. But do we consider that free riding? So there's a bit of a definitional question here. But I think what we can do is build systems that are more abundant for all of their participants, while including things like graduated sanctions, having an in-group that is allowed to use the resource and maybe an out-group that isn't. But maybe there are different stakeholder groups. There are people who contribute capital. There are people who contribute care or time or attention. There are people who contribute materials or machinery. And all of these need to be discussed in your context. There's no one-size-fits-all recipe for this, but I think we now have new tools that can allow us to allow those stakeholders to weigh in different ways and come up with these more fluid and dynamic agreements.
Did you have something to offer on the free rider, or is there a question?
Related.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, one thing related to free riders is like when you mentioned the Mayfly example, like the first business that I thought was Wayfair, because they're a dropshipping business, so they have they own none of the furniture basically. They just don't stock anything. They just manufacture that and sell it when someone orders it. So that's great if you're a shareholder of that business or if you're a customer of that business, but it's not necessarily a good thing because they're not designing a better chair. So is that a problem because they're applying a capitalist business model to this, capitalist mindset to this, or is that okay?
I think that's a good question. I think with any technology, it has the opportunity for misuse, and what we're looking at is how you can use the technology intelligently. And whilst it can be possible to apply the same business model and produce products that aren't designed to last and that are inherently poorly produced and are going to break, this business model allows for the market to actually access what it really wants and needs, and to trust that by making it more accessible for them, and actually the actual cost of producing a product or good that's designed to last versus one that's designed to break is actually not that significantly different. And actually with the design of a lot of products and goods, by designing them to break in this minimum viable way, it's more of an engineering challenge than actually building something just that works in the first place. So I think with anything there is always a dark side and a shadow side, and it's ultimately about where we want to go as a society and choosing to be driven by our values and how we create the opportunity for that to be more accessible and that to actually be possible. I also think on the free rider problem, there's a couple of challenges I would make to that. One is, I think most people, they want to contribute to the world and they want to contribute to their community because this is also how we derive status, it's how we derive identity, and when these things are visible, they don't want to be a free rider, but also sometimes we need to be carried like children in order to get to a space where we are able to actually contribute again. However, where the free riding does take place is actually more at the corporate level, especially within the open source community, whereby you have a corporate capture of a common and public good and bring it to market. And in this respect, I think there's two elements to it as to how we address it. One is to make it easier to collaborate than it is to compete, so that the ecosystem, the size of it, and by participating in it, it makes more sense for your business to do that and contribute than to set up your own separate ecosystem that's producing goods. And I think especially with respect to connecting regional networks that are acting like Mycelium, that are producing market demand directly in relationship to the community in a way that's validated by that community, rather than some kind of algorithm which tries to stalk what people want and invariably get it wrong and try and sell me shoes when I've just bought shoes. It's a completely different relationship. And if we want to be in a space where we're getting authentic, crowd-validated data, that will only really be offered to communities of trust that are in direct relationship with their community. And that's where the opportunity lies, actually, is in that authentic data collection that you're in relationship to, that you can take back at any time, and not something which has been harvested by following me around with a clipboard online and logging what I've done rather than what I want to do. And so in this respect, I think as an ecosystem, it can make more sense to participate in that and help to grow it than to try and set up your own, because you're always going to fall short, because as a large organization that's just seeking to extract value, eventually everybody's just going to say, fuck you.
And actually, I'd just like to bring to the other side of the free riding. I mean, we think of the free rider as the person who takes and doesn't give, but I think a lot of our legacy institutions have been kept alive far longer than they've needed to. You know, and we see this all the time when, like, auto manufacturing in the US, for example, massive subsidies, the cheese subsidies in the US. There are just all these strange distortions where government money goes to support an industry that needs to be propped up to protect people's livelihoods, let's say, but then it becomes this kind of undead zombie that continues to persist, and we have, you know, like the fossil fuel industry or the war industry. Like, these are not necessary to exist at the level that they do, but because they control so much of that power, they just continue to persist. And I think what we can do with these new tools is consider the composting of these zombified institutions. How do we move past, how do we deliver things closer to home, better than or cheaper or co-produced, so it doesn't involve as much cost because we're actually sourcing the resources from our network and being much more clever and full life cycle about those goods, so that we can eventually move past all of these sort of colonial era institutions and the zombified corporations and even state apparatus that are not they don't have the requisite variety to deal with the challenges of the future. We're going to be seeing faster climate breakdowns, ecological breakdowns, refugee migration, climate migration, and our current systems just are already showing that they don't have the dynamism to be able to deal with that level of challenge. So I think that's essentially what we're looking at here, is thinking in more adaptive ways. We don't have to solve all the problems. We just have to figure out how to give people more participatory input to these systems and have the ability to address our own problems at the local level using global tools wherever possible.
I would call them more like vampires instead of zombies.
Yeah, totally.
Parasites. I think we've got about like 3 minutes left. Are there any more questions, comments?
I have an idea for the next time. I thought actually that we were going to draw out some sketch out in business model. So maybe for our next startup, we find some scenario where each person can try to sketch a business model around something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I was expecting this.
Well, to be honest, it was one of the things we were thinking to do, but because we're making this up as we go, it moved in another direction. But there is actually an opportunity. I mean, we haven't set a time and space yet, but if you come and see us, there's an opportunity to do that, thinking around the stone paper and how we might actually create an evolutionary, like, network business model around it later today. So come find me, we'll set a time to play and see what we can do.
For anyone who scanned the QR code and went into the board, there's also those microzines. You can come here and you can create your own. And then you can print it. I actually have a printer right here, so we can create some of these microzines. If you want to take a few minutes and write down some ideas on alternative business models, you can use this template. We can print it out, and you can have one of these booklets ready to go in a few minutes. We can print as many as we like. So, and that, I think, is time.
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think as a core takeaway, this is an invitation to evolve faster, but then share what works across your networks, where you know that there are already. How do we connect with people that are trying to solve the same challenges that we are, and how do we begin that act of sharing as quickly as possible our failures and our successes, that we can all evolve together more quickly. And also, likewise, establishing those points of connection and relationship with those we can change together with, that we can better evolve and survive within our local areas. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Can we get a picture in front of us?
Yeah. That's very meta.
Perfect.
Okay. Good.
Oof.